unexpectedly vacant slot. However, I know Frank, and I know he's giving me the look. I don't quite know what it means, but I'll get out of here right after this. He demonstrates understanding, flexibility, and ability to go with the flow, and preparedness because he had his notes. And this is nothing more than we expect from a fellow Seth reader, right? So a big thank you. Frank lives in Wisconsin. He's a chiropractor. Those are the facts. We were talking, and he has reduced his medical practice to, it's more than half, like 2/3 time, 3/4 time, something. So I think he's gradually making room for maybe more Seth work, and I think you do ham radio. Ham radio, yes. I wasn't expecting to do this till tomorrow. But Frank has a real down-to-earth, humorous approach to the Seth material. And he has kind of this is my take on it, a common sense, shrewd insight into how it works. You know, he doesn't get all involved in airy-fairy stuff. He brings it down to where we live. And something I've discovered about Frank is what a scholar he is with the Seth material. He really researches stuff, but he also, at least he used to use a lot of humor. He probably still does. And so sometimes when you see that, you forget the solid base of knowledge that underlies it. So I think Frank's a real complete package, and we'll enjoy hearing him tonight.
Can I say something about Frank?
Certainly. Is it good or bad?
No, it's good.
Okay.
Frank is one of those people who are full of goodness, kindness, and compassion. And I've known him for, 15, 20 years? And that's all he exudes. So I would be privileged to be his patient. And I am privileged to be his friend. So.
Bravo. Well, you're wired. You don't need this.
Hi. How the hell do you live up to that? All right. Well, actually, do you ever say you're going to do something and you think, oh, poop? I kind of didn't want to do it tomorrow afternoon because sometimes I kind of fade in the afternoon. I thought, well, I'm kind of with it tonight, more or less. And I thought, well, I'll volunteer tonight. Then I got up to my room and I realized, you know, I had rewritten the center of my talk with a bunch of scratches on here and never rehearsed it. So you've got the unrehearsed, all-natural version. So keeping with the theme. Okay, well, we got some overheads. A couple of comments here. I'm not used to hearing my voice come back at me like that, but that's okay. Over the years, I've heard people mention about my overheads, that there were just too many, too detailed, the diagrams were too detailed, and people would be down there frantically writing things down that I can't imagine had that much meaning in them. But most of the quotes that I've got are from the Seth material over the years, and people would write them down. I thought, what are you writing down? They're in the books, and you're supposed to have the books. So I've got some overheads, but this year I tried, and I used some of my old ones from years ago, which hopefully you've forgotten about, and some new ones, and I'm not using PowerPoint this year. So here we go. Can everybody see these when I put them up like that? All right. I'm going to talk a little bit, well, as was mentioned, I'm a chiropractor. I've been a chiropractor for 32 years. I've been in this Seth material 32 years, and that's full time. And in all the times I've presented, I've never talked about chiropractic. I don't think I've ever mentioned chiropractic because it wasn't part of the topic. But, you know, after presenting for they finally come up with a topic that I'm actually qualified to talk about this time, and that's being natural. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about chiropractic, just a little bit, and I'm going to use some analogies from chiropractic during this talk. It's going to be about about being natural, about Seth's concept of being natural. And of course, there's been people trying to define natural and unnatural, if that's the opposite of it, for, I suppose, since the first person cooked food. You know, what is natural? The first caveman cooking food, I imagine, started the debate. But there's been all kinds of points of view of what's natural and what's not natural. And Seth has his own take on it. But anyway, just a little bit, a very little bit. Do many people here go to chiropractors? Do you know anything about chiropractic? Okay, that's quite a few hands, actually, more than I expected. Does your chiropractor, which I don't, by the way, I don't in my practice. I run basically sports practice, sports injuries, that type of thing, and some family work. But does anybody here, their chiropractor, talk to them about innate intelligence? Not a single hand. What? Innate intelligence? Okay. Ask your chiropractor sometime about innate intelligence. The origins of chiropractic, to me, this is just fascinating. The origins of chiropractic basically were the Seth material put into Victorian times understanding of the body and relating it to physical health. That was chiropractic. And Daniel Palmer, the developer of chiropractic, felt that, again, this is kind of the height of the growth of the mechanistic age. This is 20 years before the dawn of the quantum thinking. And the idea basically was the billiard ball universe, that everything had a mechanistic answer. And I'm not going to go into all the explanations of it. You've all heard it. You all know about it. But basically the idea that there's an explanation for everything. And the idea of a vitalistic concept, that there could be something more to the sum of the parts than just the sum of those parts, was a very alien, a very looked down upon concept. It was considered to be like spiritualism. It was basically looked down. In fact, I'm reading an interesting book right now called The Ghost Hunters. Has anybody read that? Ghost Hunters. It's about Victorian times and investigating, mostly in England, but the scientific attempts by like William James to investigate ghosts and ghost stories. But the idea of vitalism, the idea that there could be an innate force within anything that could mean anything, an invisible force, was unheard of, or at least certainly not scientific. And what Daniel Palmer came up with was that there is an innate intelligence that exists, and it expresses itself in living tissue, and his understanding of it was through the nervous system, that it communicated with the body and tried to get the body to stay alive. It was a force that interpreted the environment and made accommodations within the body to accommodate to nature. We call it homeostasis today. But the idea went beyond that, and he kind of went into a whole philosophy of this. I'm certainly not going to get into that. I want to just touch upon this briefly. I'm trying to pick out the points that will make sense to the Seth material. But he saw the opposite of innate intelligence, educated, what he called educated. And he felt that the role of a doctor, of a healer, well, he felt that the birthright of people was to be healthy. And actually, an interesting side story, which I could really get into, is the AMA, through the Anti-Quackery Committee in the 1960s, had the concept of expectation of health labeled as a mental illness. The expectation of health in the 1960s was labeled as a mental illness. And that was in direct contradiction to a campaign, I guess, at that time, that chiropractic was trying to go back to its roots a little bit and say you have a right to be healthy. Anyway, the 1895, Daniel Palmer was talking about, you have a right to be healthy. And you have an innate right to be healthy. And the role of a healer should be, number one, to find out where nature is being interfered with. Now, the mechanical interpretation of that dealt with the nervous system and interference to the nervous system. But he also felt that such things as what he called thoughts also created problems. And he called that the quality interference. The mechanical irritation he called the quantity interference. But anyway, there's an entire philosophy of chiropractic that when you read it is essentially an attempt at understanding universal principles and bringing them down into a practical approach relating to health as it was understood in the 1890s. Really a fascinating thing. It's not a part of what we normally discuss or talk about today. But in any case, we're going to talk about the natural man and what it means to be natural. Different people have had different ideas about natural. Seth has some ideas, and I don't know that he comes out and defines in very precise terms the point at which we are or aren't. Like with so many things, he'd like us to use our heads. But if you were to think of the concept of natural and unnatural and kind of put them on a gradated scale, at any given moment, you're not going to be all natural, all unnatural. And for any given quality or any given aspect of your life, it's certainly not going to be one or the other. There's gradations. And I'm going to hopefully be able to kind of show a point at which, for any given activity or any given moment of our life, we lean into one concept or the other. This is a quote I've used before. I'm sure many of you recognize it by Eddington. There's been other people who have made the same quote in one way or another. I found a couple of them when I came up, but this is always the one I like. Not only is the universe stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. And my interpretation of that is very simple, that any time we attempt to, and I don't know what other authors have made this statement, but anytime we attempt to take reality with a capital R and put it into concepts that deal with either words or pictures, we've already lost the concept. We've already lost it. So everything we talk about here, we're going to talk about in terms of a version of things or an approximation of things. And we all understand that, or at least we hopefully we all understand that. And I think in our quiet, reflective moments, but sometimes when there's kind of a formal presentation, we think, well, that's a concrete idea. In reality, with a small r anyway, when we're exploring the nature of our own deeper reality, it's in those contradictions, it's in those pauses of logic that you find hidden within some of the deeper truths about our life. It's not in the concrete things. In fact, as I said, if you can label something precisely and you know what it is, or you can get a real good picture of what it is, you just don't get it. It's you're not talking about a deep reality. You're talking about framework one stuff if you can really label it. So this kind of stuff is going to be a little bit on the difficult to comprehend basis, and we're going to try and hopefully make some sense out of it. All right. Early man, with early man, everything was, I actually have notes, believe it or not. This year I've got notes. Everyone has a range of, they're actually typed, believe it or not. Look at that. This is the first time for me. Everyone has a range of behavior. Okay, we went over that, 100% natural. Nobody's 100% natural. Seth tells us everything is natural. You can't be unnatural. But there are some discernible qualities that from the Sethian point of view can be defined as an expression of being a natural person. And like I said, I'm going to try and define those. Well, early man was natural. He knew he was a part of what surrounded him. Seth talks about early man really not even differentiating between himself and nature. And he knew that when there was a storm, it was part of his own emotional nature. There was something disrupted within him. He may not have had the intellectual understanding, but he probably had a much deeper emotional and intuitive understanding of his connection with nature. Come up. Can you read that? Okay, it says, Mom, Walter's playing evolution with himself again. So, anyway, he felt and responded to the immediacy and the temperament of his surroundings. He was a part of nature. He was connected. And there wasn't yet an organized attempt to define things by their differences. I guess I can't put my hand, oh, there we go, put my hand in my pocket there with that. There was no organized attempt to break things down, look at the differences, and start labeling them. That took a little while. And when that happened, we wind up with things such as wonderment and awe and feelings of helplessness creeping in And they began to separate, the self began to separate in terms of consciousness from the surroundings. And that's not a really good sentence, but like I said, I didn't rehearse this one. I think the idea here is that early man felt connected, and as he began to look at differences between things, as he began at times to feel helpless, for instance in a storm, the division started. Now this isn't exactly Seth's concept of the pause. You know, we have the idea of the pause for consciousness, a pause or a delay. It's more the idea of separate from nature. And that's kind of the emerging of institutions, primarily at this time, institution of religion. Organized religion emerged with a workable description for man. And if you remember last year, we kind of went through that whole thing about describing what religions and the control they had and the little history of Mother Church and so on. But basically their description was man was matter, which is uncontrollable, but his destiny was spirit, which was unknowable. So we're really talking about being disconnected, and except it was unknowable except through the church, and this further developed the isolation of man from his own life. So again, we're jumping through however many centuries here in terms of our own linear thinking of our current civilization, centuries of time of separation, connection with nature. And then I'm jumping ahead quite a bit, and I'm going into Newton here, and we came up with Newton and the billiard ball concepts of reality, and we all know about that. We've talked about it here many times, the mechanistic existence. Man was only an expression of laws of nature, and his existence was incidental to the experience. And what little uniqueness was afforded by an unknowable spirit was whisked away at that point. And the ultimate expression of a mechanistic view as it related to mankind was Darwinism. And man was who he was simply by accident. And I've got down here some little scribbles about the word about physicists, and what they are doing is not describing the world or reality with a capital R. They're using analogies and metaphors and mathematics to explain the behavior of nature as it is viewed by their instruments. It's not meant to be a literal interpretation of the world, yet it's taken as literal. And the public, ourselves, and society in general, we tend to take interpretations by the scientists as, at least in our Western society, in much more literal ways. And so the billiard ball image led to a certain way of looking at life. Now, I'd like to kind of go off on a tangent, but I won't because I really get into words. But the whole idea is that words shape and limit and control the way in which we think. And so if we have a vision of the world as a billiard ball mechanistic view, literally things grow around that. Our concepts, our ideas, our institutions, our way of looking at what's real and what's not real. And I'll get back to my notes here so I don't get too far away. The billiard ball image led to a certain way of looking at life as a series of things rather than significances or energy or probabilities. In other words, things were real. The billiard balls were real. Newtonian physics was real. All of the other, what we call today the subtle energies, weren't real. And interactions, those weren't real. At multiple levels, I should say, weren't real. Knowledge of things was seen as practical. Knowledge of self was seen as superfluous. Any attempt to understand life in terms of unseen forces was considered quaint. Now, I jumped to a little chiropractic thing here. BJ saw this dilemma. BJ was the son of Daniel Palmer, and referred to the difference as innate versus educated. And he saw innate as the quality that organized matter into life, a force that could be trusted, communicated with, and was as real as anything that's physical. And it wasn't a religious or a spiritualistic concept. He saw educated as an external attempt to make sense of a world more complex than the creatures in it. This artificial separation led to the questions posed by quantum physicists. And I'm not going to go into that, but you know about how there were, basically everything was settled by the Newtonian physicists, except for what? Speed of light, wasn't that one of the ones? The speed of light they were measuring at that time, or trying to, and they had some problems with that. And the way in which photons acted. And that led to the Brownian experiments. It led to Einstein's work, which was the beginning of the quantum age, but he himself, of course, was a Newtonian physicist. Institutions, the great protectors of recognized reality and builders of life's mazes. Okay. The actual talk gets started in a minute here, so bear with me. We got to go through a couple of things here, people. All right. Anyway, the artificial separation led to the questions posed by quantum physicists, and we know about the 1923, what was the conference? Copenhagen, thank you. Copenhagen and the original Copenhagen interpretation of reality. We know about the two-slit experiment and Schrodinger's cat and all of those things. So we're not going to get into all of that. And we know about CU units and EE units and little coordinate points and slowing down of EE units to the speed of light so that we can create an instantaneous creation of reality. We know about all that. Not everything behaved as a particle. And at small sizes, nothing acted as a predictable particle. And suddenly the examiner was important. Suddenly the examiner was important. The understanding that the world is weird had arrived. And that's undoubtedly why we've chosen to be born at this time. I've got no doubt about that. I'm very serious. I think that we have all chosen to be born at this time, although I'm sure this scene has been enacted many, many, many times throughout history. The fact is that I think all of us here in this room probably chose this time to be born, partly because we're seeing some real transitional times where we're seeing a melding together of science and spirit in very real ways, unlike things that had been attempted before. They used to burn. Remember we talked about, I don't know if anybody here remembers, we talked about Bruno a couple of times, and they burned him at the stake and nailed his tongue to the cross. Remember that? Sure, because he was talking about these things. He was talking about atoms. He was talking about consciousness. Pardon? Omnicentric unit, correct, yes. Okay. All right, so that brings us to the current time and Seth's understanding of natural and unnatural and some examples of experiences. What does that mean? I have no idea. I did write this, but some examples of experience. I don't have a clue, but I'm going to give you a couple of little tedious things here. Oh yeah, okay, I know what this is. Not a problem, it's a Seth talk. What does this one say? Okay, we know this. The emotions, imagination, however, give you the closest contact with other portions of your own reality. Not a very profound thought. We all know that. In the theme of keeping these things simple, here we go. All right, what is that? A wrench. Okay, I'm gonna go through two examples here, and they're going to be tedious a little bit. So please bear with me. I know you all understand this, but I want to get us all back to the basics. Wasn't it Vince Lombardi he had with the Packers? What? Keep it simple. Well, yeah, no, he had these are pro ball, now this is going back quite a ways, but they're pro ball players making huge fortunes. These are the cream of the crop, right? And he would start out each season, he'd hold up a football and say, "This is a football." And then go over the basics. And why? Because the basics are about all I understand. No, because the basics are essential. It is so easy to get dazzled by the bullshit, by what we create, and think that it's real. It's so easy to think that the material that we create is real. Everything around us confirms for us that it's real. We learn that. You know, our little 2-year-old kids know more than we do about this. They're talking to their dead relatives. They're seeing realities that we don't see. My daughter did that when she was 2 years old. She told me about her previous life. I found it interesting. My wife was going, oh, you know. but that's 30 years ago. But she's 30 now. Just 30 next month. But anyway, I found it interesting. 2-year-olds know that, but they learn that there's no value. I'm not talking about value fulfillment. I'm talking about value in our Western society, in our physically oriented, billiard ball still universe. The rewards are in responding to, as if it's real, physical things. And so we learn to suppress the other inputs, the other information. We learn that it's, for lack of a better term, we really learn it's not real. So that's why I'm going back to the basics. And we're going to start with this basic, and that's a wrench. Okay. All right, here goes. Like I said, a couple of these are tedious. There's 2 of them. Bear with me, then we'll get into the actual talk. All right. Back somewhere in the 70s, remember there were pictures of the astronauts? Who remembers this analogy I've given before? Pictures of the astronauts, and the guy's doing a spacewalk, and he's got a wrench, and he's going to turn a bolt, remember, for the pictures on TV? And he's got that wrench on the spacecraft, and he puts some pressure on it through his arm, and what happens? His body is turning, right? Why is his body turning? Why? No gravity, but what's the real, ultimately, yeah, no gravity. What does that mean? There was no external reality, no reference point, right? There was no reference point. So he's turning this. Here's the force. Here's the wrench. His body and the space station that he's working on are both the same. There's no external reference point for that force to play through. So what does he do? He grabs onto a handle, right? Makes an intelligent decision, grab onto a handle. He now has a real. This is defined as real at this point. A reference point, an objective reference point. Now the force can be transferred through the body. He can put the wrench here, and he can do what? Work. He can do physical work. Or he can play. He can hit the thing. Or he can do work. But he has a reference point. He has a medium within which the energy can work through his muscles, and he can turn the wrench. And it works. It works. It's real. It's not phony. It's constructed, isn't it? It's artificial. When we look at the nature of things, this is a very artificial point, isn't it? He chose it. He arbitrarily chose it to make it to be his reference point so that he could turn the wrench. So he turns the wrench, he finishes his work. And he's got, after his work, about 90 seconds of air left. Now the guys in the capsule have a little more air than that. And they say, okay, come on back in, it's time to come in. Now he's learned something, hasn't he? He's learned that this reality is real, and he can define it as real because he can do work using this as his reference point. He's created a reference point that has all the criterion of being real. He can turn the bolt. Come into the spaceship, your air is going to be up. Okay, well, I can't get there. Well, just come in. Well, let go of the handle. I can't let go of the handle. It's the only thing that lets me go from here to there. I can push with this. It's real. It's the only reality I know. Well, just let go of it. We'll get you another handle. We'll pull you in. No, I can't. Well, you know, of course we get, I don't know what happens then, but we typically get smarter astronauts than that. But the point is that it met the criterion of being real. It was artificial. It could have been just temporary and used in the moment to do his work. And then when it served its purpose and now was actually interfering with him living, he could have said, you know, I need a new reference point, some new facts, a new point of view. I'll do this handle. I'll get in a little closer, and now I'll move in closer to the space capsule. That's pretty basic. But when we start talking about creating physical reality, as I know you all know we're going to get to, that's a pretty important point because we do things just about as dumb sometimes. Oh, by the way, that's, well, never mind with that one. All right. Is there any, I can't imagine, never mind. I was going to say, is there anybody that doesn't understand that? You all understood that when I started talking about it. Here's a question. What should, before we get to the definition of natural, what should a natural person be able to do? What should a natural person, now again, we're talking about a range. Don't think in this in terms of being specifics or absolutes. A person who's, let's say, a little more natural, what should they be able to do? How does that translate into behavior?
Be flexible. Be flexible.
Flexible. Yeah, that's a good thing. I was trying to think of some of the most basic things. And the theme of keeping these simple. Natural person ought to be able to walk. Ought to be able to walk across the floor. Ought to be able to use his intent to do work. Ought to be able to go from point A to B and not be hampered. Not be hampered by, let's call them external things, such as furniture. Be able to figure a way around furniture or move furniture. Ought to have some trust. A natural person should have some trust. Trust that the wood that the floor is made out of, for instance, comes from good trees, that it hasn't rotted out. Trust that the carpenters have made a good floor with proper beams and supports underneath, that the house was, or the building was designed correctly. Trust that their knees aren't going to give out. So trust is going to be a part of what a natural person should be able to do. Should be able to walk across the floor and not be stopped by guilt, wondering if it's okay to walk across the floor. Is it good to walk across the floor? Am I being a good person by going from A to B? What will happen to me if I get to B? Will something happen to me between A and B? Not looking for signs of approval to make it all right to walk from A to B. Signs from God, heaven, or inner voices. Somehow, a natural person ought to be able to trust that at some level it's good to fulfill the intent of walking from A to B, or whatever it is in walking, and to appreciate that somehow within that good, not necessarily in logical terms think these things, but somehow allow the very normal feeling that value fulfillment is taking place, not just for himself, but for his shoes, for the floor, for the molecules that make up the rug, for everything involved in that intent, no matter how far down you take the collapse of the waveform or whatever your interpretation is of thought and intent and spirit becoming matter, that somehow down the whole chain, each free will is being expressed and appreciating the ability to be a part of you choosing to walk across the floor. The simple mechanism of walking across the floor contains a microcosm of virtually any decision or any other thing we do in life. And yes, you should be flexible enough to decide, I've walked halfway, I'm going to do A sub 1 as my first goal. I'm going to stop here, or I'm going to go around the table, or I'm going to walk in that direction too. A natural person should be able to combine intent, belief, and action, into some kind of efficient behavior that has value fulfillment. A natural person, here's actually one to think about. This is one you might have to think about a little bit. A natural person should be able to know what makes them happy. That doesn't mean they are happy, doesn't mean that they're not happy. Doesn't even mean they're doing anything about it, although certainly I would think they would. But a person who's tending to be more natural should at least be able, when you ask, what makes you happy, ought to have some clue. Because a natural person will understand at some level, and when I say understand, I don't necessarily mean intellectually. Again, words absolutely fail us when we try to deal with these concepts. They're very good. Seth is the word master of all time, which is why I love reading Seth. But even Seth tells us that words don't serve the full context of the meaning. But the natural person should be able to feel somehow and understand somehow that he's connected to his life and that there is value fulfillment within happiness. And some idea as to how to be happy. All right. There are no questions on that. That was pretty simple. These are the 9 inner senses. And the most important thing about the 9 inner senses, there's not 9 of them, they're not inner, and they aren't senses. We'll get to that later. All right. Oh, here's your comment too. Again, that's very important. Should be flexible in how they view life. A natural person should be flexible in how they view life and able to change perception of the world. Has anybody here read a book called PK Man by Dr. Mishlove? Oh, it's a fascinating read. It's about a fellow that would change the weather. Anyway, it's about changing perspective, and if we I don't think Dr. Mishlove understood, at least he didn't bring it out in his book, I kept waiting for it. Excuse me, he did not seem to understand the role of consciousness. He very carefully documented 30 years of behavior with this Mr. Olson, who could change weather and do all kinds of things, change sports events. He was paid huge sums of money by professional sports teams to change the outcomes of games, all documented by Dr. Mishlove. But I don't think he understood the idea of, because he had this dilemma, and again, I'm back to the football thing, or I'm back to the basics. If you're holding on to some version of there's a shared physical objective reality, you're still holding on to a handle. There is no shared objective external reality. And that's why I was wondering if anybody had read this book, because this is a man that would change the reality for literally millions of people, bringing rain into areas, bringing rain into cities that were in the middle of a drought. He didn't bring rain into a city that has millions of people, because there are no cities that have millions of people. Do you understand what I mean? We each create our own reality. I think this is one of the things that we read and we go, oh yeah, I know what that means. We each create our own reality. No, we each create our own reality. What's shared is information. What's shared is an understanding about things. So when rain was brought into an area, what he did was he influenced the belief structure of millions of people who then believed they were in the middle of a rainstorm, which allowed each person to experience rain. I only bring that book up because it's the best documented book I've read that deals with, let's call it, just label it weird, dealt with by a man who knew what he was doing, dealing with a man of extraordinary talent to influence others, yet Dr. Mishlove missed the point of consciousness. And Seth tells us over and over and over, you're just not going to understand anything until you get to the point where you understand the role of consciousness in your physical world. That is the difference. And consciousness is what we use to create physical reality. All right. See if I can give a little different example. Another thing that a natural person should be able to do is to see connections between things. Obviously with himself or herself and nature, but just to see connections. Did anybody see them? Oh, you had to have seen the Flight of the Phoenix. They made it twice. Everybody seen that movie, Flight of the Phoenix? Right? About the airplane? Okay. Do you know the story? Okay. No. Okay. The person next to you will tell you.
Neither of them know it.
Okay. Quick synopsis of the movie. It was remade, and I don't know who was in it, but I'm thinking of the original version. It was kind of cool. Anyway, plane out in the desert, twin-engine plane. Guys are, I think, with an oil drilling well or whatever. Plane crashes. They're obviously in desperate measures. Limited supplies, limited water, limited food. Plane is wrecked. They're going to die. So they're looking for options, an intelligent, natural thing to do. So some, of course, are arguing, well, we can walk this way, and I think we'll find a well, but it's probably dry, so we can die in that direction, or we can die in this direction. Or we could stay here and wait for help, which isn't coming because the navigator didn't calculate things right and we're, whatever, hundreds of miles off of where we're supposed to be, or no one's looking for us, or whatever. I don't remember the exact storyline. But one of the passengers who had hooked a ride on that plane says, well, I know how to make this twin-engine wreck into a single-engine plane that will fly us out of here. They go, well, you can? Yeah, we've got welding equipment from the mining operation. We've got manpower. We've got a little strength left in ourselves. We can do this work. It'll be the last effort we can do, but we can make this into a single-engine plane that will fly, and it'll fly us out of here, and I know it. I design planes. Hey. Guy's got what it takes. And so, of course, the drama of the story is they're battling between different things, and some people die, and on and on. But basically, they're held together, and you've got this hope. You can see, little by little, through all of these trials and tribulations, they take this mass of falling apart metal and convert it into this horrible, ugly little single-engine plane that should work. And they're not quite finished yet, but someone starts going through this fellow's notebooks, and they come across this catalog. The guy's looking through the catalog and says, well, what the hell is this? He said, well, those are the planes I designed. He said, well, these are toys. And here's the key. He says, no, they're not toys. These are models. A toy is a little plastic thing you put on a shelf that doesn't do anything. You dust it once in a while. A model flies because the principles are the same, whether it's 3 feet across or 30 feet across. The principles are the same. And a natural person is not bedazzled by bullshit. A natural person can see through the creations and see patterns within things. Didn't Mary, I'm trying to think of the quote you said, it was that if you don't deal with the issue, the clone comes back. Where's Mary? There's Mary, right? The clone comes back. Yeah, the patterns. You see the patterns behind things. All right, that was Albert Salmi in the first movie version. It was a neat, he did a great acting job on that one. I don't know if it was Johnny Depp in the second one. Was it Dennis Quaid in the second one? Okay, thank you. Plane crashed. No, they got out. Why tell you? That's a movie. You get to watch the movie. All right, anyway. All right, so where's my other diagram here? Here we go. Oh, there we go. Can't you read backward? Okay. So we're kind of reaching a point here. What is that point in any given quality that we have, any given characteristic we have, in any given activity we're doing? At what point are we getting from natural to unnatural? And that I'm going to get to, but I am going to actually go back to this right now. And this is pretty basic here. Joe, do you recognize that? You should. That's Highway 14. Didn't know that, did you? I don't know if I ever told you this story. All right. Natural person. I'm going to start with some hints as to what a natural person should do. And I know we all know that we know this, but that's okay. We're going to touch on some things. And then I'm going to give you some exercises. You know how when you hear people accomplishing things and you listen to them, they say, well, I'm going to tell you how to do this. And they say, well, I did this, put that together, and then I, flew a rocket off to Mars, or I swam the English Channel. I practiced for 3 weekends in my pool, and I swam the English Channel. You go, Jesus, I can't do that. Or someone else has, I can teach you exercises just for 25 years, just do 300 sit-ups a day and you'll be able to lift these weights or something. No, the exercises I'm going to give you are what I call low-tech. They're just so incredibly simple, low-tech, and their purpose is going to be to either help you be a little more natural. Because, value fulfillment, which is why we're here, why we chose to be here, was value fulfillment. It's contained within the little challenges that we have. That's the whole point. That's why we're alive. Yeah, some of us have bigger challenges. Most of us. If you're at a Seth conference, most of your challenges are pretty small. I'm making some general assumptions, but you obviously had to go through. How many people here think they're at a real estate conference? No. Or thought they were here to eat asparagus or something at a natural food conference. No, you got here by a series of determined, purposeful actions where you took specific steps, you had enough money, or you made it. You made plans, you got out of work, you did certain things, you took care of family issues, health issues, transportation issues. You made a whole series of decisions and you got here. So clearly you don't have these, it's not like we're in Bangladesh or something dealing with survival. For most of us, we're pretty well accomplished, but we all have challenges. And my low-tech reminders are just to help us get a little more on track so we have a little more fun, a little more efficiency in translating our intent, our beliefs, and our purposes into efficient operation. So the low-tech solutions, the low-tech ones are meant to either you to play with or to come up with your own that are triggering ideas of your own. But I'm going to show you some hints as to what a natural person should be able to do. Again, I'm going back to 30 years ago. I lived out west of Janesville, about 7 miles west of Janesville, and my wife at that time was coming back from grocery shopping, and Highway 14 is just a little 2-lane road. This is out in the country, and these are farm roads, so these are, I don't know if they're a mile. Joe, do you know how, you probably don't know how square they are, but they've got to be at least a half a mile for those farm roads out there. Probably closer to a mile. So to take Highway 14, to get from Janesville where she's shopping out to our house out here out in the country, we had a little farmette out there, you would drive on this 2-lane road, and there'd be absolutely no reason on the face of the earth to deviate from that road. There's no purpose in deviating. And you sure as heck don't need to go a mile up, a mile over, and a mile back for any reason whatsoever in conventional or framework 1 or physical reality or whatever you want to say it. And as she would tell this story, she was driving along and there was absolutely nothing but clear road ahead of her. It was certainly a clear day and there was no reason whatsoever to turn off of that road. Yet, whatever your interpretation of it is, her higher self knew a different future or whatever, she had a strong inclination, something she would not normally follow, but a strong inclination to make a right-hand turn and go this route around where there was no reason to go around. When she got back on Highway 14 and continued on, what did she see? Yeah, an accident, rearview mirror, big accident. A couple of cars all over the road. I don't know if ambulances were there. I just simply don't remember. But that's a natural person. At least at that moment, under those circumstances, paying attention to what? Non-official information. And paying attention to it in a way that has meaningful consequences. All right. Now, that's so we don't get tired. I just didn't want to see anybody out there going, oh, I got to get this diagram down. Okay. Obviously, we have free will. That's another point here. We can choose to ignore anything we wish to ignore. Free will always operates. It's a part of our nature. Children, I've talked a little bit about children here in the notes. Says children have this intuitive sense, and they learn that it is a little survival value. Basically, if you're calling to mommy using your psychic powers and mommy doesn't answer, you figure out a different way of doing it. So let's start out with a definition. This is my definition of what a natural person is. It's someone who is able to be gracefully poised in the present. Gracefully poised in the present. And there was a time at 3 in the morning I knew what the hell that meant. All right. We each have our own interpretation of that one. Gracefully poised means that there's no strain to either become or to get rid of. Poised implies that we're balanced, and I want you to understand that it means consciously balanced to some extent, even though the consciousness doesn't mean that alert, top-of-the-head consciousness. It can be an innate consciousness, but it's close enough to the surface that it has responsiveness within the body. We're poised in the present, meaning not only the physical present, but the temporal present. Or I should say not just the temporal present, but the physical present, meaning your physical surroundings. This morning, Helen made a comment about fear was not meant to be a motivating force, right? Was that the way you said it? It wasn't to be a motivating force? All right. If fear is a motivating force, you're not poised in the present, are you? Guilt There's another warning mechanism that's a very natural mechanism. Guilt is meant to be a warning. You did this before, you weren't happy, don't do it again. And used in that concept, it's a part of a natural awareness of your status in the moment. It's part of free will, it's a part of choice. It's a part of that delay mechanism that Seth talks about that's so essential for our learning here in Framework 1 about the, I use the word responsibility, I don't think he uses the word responsibility, but the idea of our purposeful correction, creation being a result of a melding together of our beliefs, our emotions, our intent. There's a pause. But in the moment, if you use guilt as a punishment, you're not in the moment. You're living in the past. If you use fear as a motivation, you're not in the moment. Guilt as a warning allows you to use that tool in the moment. Fear as a warning allows you to incorporate your intellect with your intuition to make an informed choice at the moment as to what to do. This is a very fluid state, and obviously influence is influential in different aspects of our personality and different traits and different characteristics, constantly changing. We can be totally natural in some situations and turn into this weird paranoid 2 minutes later. All right, so gracefully poised in the present is my definition. And what's the attitude of someone who is being natural? I thought about that for a little while and I came up with, well, maybe childlike wonderment at just how well the world is suited to our intent. Just a childlike wonderment at just how well the whole thing works. Sounds terribly self-centered, doesn't it? But I think that that's the key to understanding it. All right. What are some of the hints or signs that we're in a natural state? How do you know if you're in a natural state or not, or you're kind of leaning towards a natural state?
Things work out easier.
Yeah, things work out easier, sure. Joy. I wrote down, these are the stream of consciousness thoughts I wrote down, having a good time, enjoying the trip. The universe is of good intent and value fulfillment is the natural state of all energy essences. So we're looking for things that give us a clue as to whether or not we're being natural. We trust our own being. Trust our own being. We trust our bodies. We trust our environment. Walking across the floor, right? We feel important in our own place and time. Seth talks about us being at our best when we're, I don't know if he uses the word best, but heroic self brings out our best qualities. We feel connected to our own life. We respect non-traditional inputs. Now that's probably not a problem here with us as Sethians. The whole thing is based on listening to a dead person talk through a housewife. I mean, it's not like it has to be conventional, but we may also have put some real value judgments on things, and that's what I kind of want people to think about. We've put some value judgments, perhaps, on some things, like didn't Jane put value judgments on the concept of work? She couldn't quite get that fun thing down. She just had to work her butt off. And Seth kept working with her to kind of go, you got to let go of this. It'll be okay. So we have our own things we put value judgments on, but feeling connected to your own life and respecting non-traditional inputs are some of the attitudes that go along with your tendency to be natural. The next one I've got down is the present is what we are operating in, not the future or the past. I've mentioned that. And we can translate past or future concerns into effective action in the present, but we're alive in the present, acting in and responding to the present. You can build bigger levees because of fear that you don't have another hurricane, but you're taking effective action in the present to do something about it, right? So you're aware of the past, but you're taking effective action in the present. Flexibility. Circumstances are not written in granite. And our intent is the force that molds them. And we can let go of the handle. We can create new circumstances. We can walk across the floor. We can take action that's purposeful. I had that quote from George Bernard Shaw, and I guess I didn't put it in here, but if you don't like your circumstances, make your own. Remember that one? Sure you do. Good. Okay. I always like this one. He was perfectly content until some do-gooder defined cage for him. All right. Sometimes you got to look for the meaning in here, but these actually do relate to this talk. All right. My favorite quote of all time at the moment. Perspective, use it or lose it. If you turn to this page, you are forgetting that what is going on around you is not reality. Think about that. Here's my favorite quote of all time at the moment. If you will practice being fictional for a while, you will understand that fictional characters are sometimes more real than people with bodies and heartbeats. I love both of those. I would get those into a talk about nutrition or anything. I don't care what. Doesn't make any difference. I love those two. Oh, here's the George Bernard Shaw. Good. I must have just materialized. People are always blaming their circumstances for what they are. I don't believe in circumstances. The people who get on in this world are the people who get up and look for the circumstances they want. And if they can't find them, make them. Okay. So, are there any... Oh, here we go. Let me just finish this up. External reality is observed by the outer ego. You know, we know these mechanisms. If anyone remembers the diagram I drew that people were trying to draw years ago. External reality observed by the outer ego without distortion. That means things such as fear, doubt, worry. Inner ego gets undistorted information and communicates to the higher self. CUs excite the EEs that slow down to the speed of light at coordinate points and efficiently create an environment that we use free will to engage in rewarding behavior in. You said it very well. It was Nick, and it was someone over here that said, yeah, everything works efficiently. That's all that means. Okay, so are there any advantages to being natural? Is this one page or two? I have no idea. It looks like two. You'd think there'd be information in there. I don't know. You always wish that would happen when someone hands you change. You know, your 20s are stuck together. All right, you get home and you go, whoa. All right. Any advantage to being natural? I got to tell you about chiropractic for a minute. I got to tell you a couple of stories here. I know the concept of it is if it isn't broke, don't fix it. By how much time do I have? Huh? Oh, okay. If it isn't broke, don't fix it. I'm going to tell you a couple of quick chiropractic things. Simply because they're cute, but they make the point. And it gives me a good transition into the Seth stuff here. I don't normally talk about chiropractic outside of my office. I don't talk about it on the street. I don't talk about it when I go to a store or when I'm buying a car or whatever I'm doing. I'm very much into people will find the doctor they want and do things the way they want. But some of the conversations are interesting and fun, and I'm going to give you two. I'm going to give you the one that occurs when someone comes up that knows I'm a chiropractor, and this has happened 472,000 times, I keep count. Yeah, if I was ever sick, I'd go to one of you guys. I'd go to one of you guys before I'd go to an MD because I just think things ought to be done naturally. But I don't need to see one of you guys because I haven't got any problems. And that's good. I'm glad to hear it. You ever take aspirin? Well, every day. I got headaches and my shoulder bothers me. Well, I see you walking with a limp. Well, my knee, of course. The knee just gives me a problem in my back down here. How about Tums? I see a roll of Rolaids in your pocket. Well, I got to take Rolaids and Tums, but I balance them. I see you've got an inhaler there. Well, yeah. Can't breathe without that. And my allergies are acting up this time of year. And thank God I got my flu shot. Okay. What's my point? My point is that we grow to accommodate. It's called accommodating behavior. I will tell you, that is true. That is the type of thing that happens. I will tell you a very true story. This is a good, almost 30 years ago. There's a fellow I knew him casually. And I saw him up at the mall one time, and he was walking kind of like this. I said, Bob, how are you doing? He says, I'm doing pretty good. Good to see you. I said, your shoulder giving me trouble? Yeah, I was in a skiing accident. He says, but I went to the doctor. It's okay. It's coming along good. Almost a year to the day. What I said to him was, well, hey, if it gives you more trouble, or if it doesn't clear out, come and see me. That's what I do for a living. I treat injuries. I treat sports injuries. Almost a year to the day, I saw Bob again in the same mall. True. So how you doing, Bob? Doing good. We accommodate to our problem. Let's just call it problems. I don't have a better word at this time of the night. We accommodate to things. They are natural to us. Seth tells us that when we've incorporated into our body identity, we're in a little bit of treatment, and literally things start to happen that lead to fixes and solutions that were easier and more fun and more rewarding at multiple levels than the persisting of the continuous creation of the problem we had adapted to. So that's number one. Number two is the serendipity factor. Again, a true story. I had been in practice all of about a couple of years. It was maybe more than a couple of years, but I was still new in practice. And people on their history, although we take a very good history, actually at that time, can't remember if I've had a full staff for about 25 years, and I can't remember if I did at that time or not. But anyway, either my assistant would have done the history or I would have done. In any case, I always follow up on the history as part of the initial exam. So there's thorough history, a detailed history after that, a focus history, examination, x-rays. It's a rather lengthy process to get into my office. Not too much gets by. But people learn to not mention certain things because they just know a chiropractor's not going to do anything about it, so you don't mention it. And you have a health form with all of these things on there, and you ask pointed questions and so on, but certain things slip through. And I will never forget this case. And this demonstrates to me, again, we're going in with this idea of why bother to be natural for the Seth concept. This is my lead into it, a true story, chiropractic story from about 25 or so years ago. A woman came to me for headaches, and I did my workup, did my exam, did a neuro exam, did the whole thing, took my x-rays, knew what I was going to do. But again, I'm a new practitioner at that point, kind of nervous about everything. I was nervous at that point. It takes a while. And I had adjusted the woman one day, and she comes back the second day. And she's laying on the table, and she turns her head. I was looking through my notes or whatever, and putting the x-rays up. And she said, Did anything you do yesterday, because I'd adjust her neck for the first time yesterday, did anything you do yesterday have anything to do with my hearing? And of course, right away I'm getting nervous, thinking, oh my God, geez, I don't know. And my first impression was to say, no, your hearing is fine. But I just said, you know, it could. There's no direct connection between the spinal nerves and the ear, but there are indirect connections. The auditory is internal to the skull. It's not a spinal nerve, but there are connections. There are places where the nerves in the neck can affect the blood supply and so on. And yes, it can affect your hearing, especially the blood supply to the ear. And she said, well, you know, I got to tell you this. I've had tinnitus, ringing in the ears. She's had ringing in the ears for 20 years. She had been to the University of Wisconsin repeatedly. She had been to every ear doctor. She had had every test. This was before MRIs. I think this was before CAT scans. I don't remember, but it was before MRI. But she had had all of these tests done, and she had had continuous ringing in the ears for 20 years. She said, after your adjustment, by the time I got to my car, my tinnitus had stopped, and it hasn't been back since. Of course, again, the second inclination is, well, we don't need to touch that again, you know. But so I call that the serendipity. And by the way, those of you that are going to chiropractors, you can ask them that story, and they will have their own version of it, because that is the nature of chiropractic practice. It is filled with serendipity. Unbelievable. And this isn't a chiropractic talk, but I will tell you that is the nature, that is the common nature of practice. But in any case, for our Sethian concepts here, you don't know what's going to be uncovered. You don't know what new vistas are awaiting when you start to do things a little more naturally. Now, this is not going to be, like I say, for people here, this isn't going to be some sudden shift. You're not going to leave here with some suddenly, seeing God or something. But there will be areas. We all have to have challenges. That's how we develop value fulfillment, is through our, whatever you want to call them, challenges, problems, whatever. That's how we do it. And so if you want to start leaning a little more to the natural, I'm going to give you some little tune-up suggestions. Some may mean nothing to you. Others may trigger other thoughts about things you can do. Some may actually be things you've used before that you've gotten away from, and you go, oh yeah, I remember I did something like that 10 years ago. That was fun. These are things at various stages of your awareness and your day to use. This is all low tech. There isn't a single thing here that you need to write down. There isn't a single technique in terms of how to stand or do anything else or anything like that. These are low tech. And they're meant to trigger an awareness, first of all, perhaps of unused resources, the 9 inner senses, which aren't 9. They're not inner and they're not senses. I should clarify that. They're all one. Seth did us a favor, like he does with all of this, and try to divide things. Dividing is what we do best. Dividing is what we do as framework 1, linear thinking, physical-oriented creatures. We divide, look at the differences, and say, whoa, am I smart. He took 9 major points of interest and kind of put them together and said, this is this, this is this, this is this. And to a certain extent, I'm sure that they are, in some sense, more emphasized in different times than not. Certainly, psi time is one that we experience as a separate type thing. Knowing something by its essence is one too. Feeling a vibrational touch with things is another thing that I can kind of separate as an inner sense. But most of this stuff works together. And that's true of probably all information, both traditional and non-traditional. And the inner senses are probably more closely aligned in terms of our conscious recognition of them as emotions, hunches, inclinations, leaning, non-verbal leaning concepts, things that it isn't easy to put into words. Hunches is the best word I can come up with at the moment. They aren't inner only in the sense that we aren't inner. We aren't inner, we aren't outer. We are. We are everywhere. We are at every place that exists. Our focused personality at the moment, utilizing our outer and inner ego to communicate with the outer, is involved in physical reality where we do create a handle to hold on to, we do work using it, and we get excited about it, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how we learn in Framework 1 existence. That's why we became physical, to learn the value of intent and purpose and how it translates into, let's call it, consequences. So there's nothing wrong in any of this. But we are everywhere. Our Framework 1 focus is just one part of our personality. Everybody here knows that. So they're not senses because they're emotions more than anything else. They're not inner because they're everywhere. And there aren't 9 of them. There aren't 9 anything. There is no list of anything. But I am forever grateful to every word ever written by Seth, if you misunderstand where I'm coming from. Because he did the best of taking this type of information and carefully spending 7 years with Jane to just learn how to communicate with her with the least amount of distortion for this information. This type of information is very difficult, I think, to get into our heads in Western culture. It's difficult to get it into a form that can be readily digested by a number of people. And I think to that extent, we all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Seth and Jane and Rob for their combined efforts in doing this. I don't think anybody's ever even come close to producing work of the quality that we have in the Seth material. So while I might pick on it being 9 and inner and senses, that's probably the best way to express it. Anyway, we're going to start out with some techniques. I can't imagine anybody here did not understand everything I just covered before we get into techniques. Am I right? Okay. Is everybody with me on this thing?
Well, I don't know that I understood everything.
Sure you did. See? All right. This is the technique that I think is the best. This is an actual technique. I don't think anything beats this, but I'm going to tell you, I don't think it's particularly easy to use. I've worked with this, I played with it, I've experimented with it. Linda Dahl writes, I don't know what name she gives to this, I don't remember, it's been years since I've read it, but I call it the assume technique. And this is actually to be used when you're actually presented with a situation that's right now, it's immediate, it ain't good, and you need a difference. You need something different. It's right now. Now, if you're driving your car and there's a tree in front of you, do something simple, Framework 1, turn the wheel. But this is for things where there's a group of circumstances that have not worked out. You've discovered they haven't worked out. Things are bad. They're going downhill, and there is nothing you can do rationally in Framework 1 to do anything about it. I call it the assume technique. And what you do is, at the base level, at the deepest level you can find at that moment, let go of physical reality, know that the universe is of good intent, and that these circumstances were the absolute best ones for you to be in right now to get where you need to be. And that not only will everything work out for the best, but it'll work out better than you could possibly ever imagine. Then let go of it. Let go of it. Let go of it. And I have used that, and I'm going to tell you it works. I don't think it's necessarily easy to use that technique, but if you do, it works. Number 2, take a nap. Low tech. Take a nap. Number 3, keep a dream diary. That's a little more high tech. You need a pencil and paper. Number 4, Evaluate your diet. Now, I am not speaking as a chiropractor. I'm not talking about hypoglycemia or anything else. I'm talking about evaluate your diet. What do you think about your food? What do you think about the food when you're eating it? How do you feel about it? How does it make you feel? I'm not, again, talking chemically here. I'm talking about the act of eating. Very low tech. I'm not against any of the other concepts. I'm talking about low tech. How do you feel about your food? It's an intimate part of your experience in life. Feel your clothes. What I mean by that is pay attention to the 99.99% of information that is below your conscious awareness, but that is still an input into your life. Pay attention to your surroundings. Pay attention to your, part of that is your self-talk that you don't think about. What accommodations have you made in your self-talk? What accommodations have you made in your environment? Learn to respect what you tell yourself about yourself and others. Feel your posture. Look at animals. Look at others. What does it tell you? What are you learning from it? What do you learn about everything from relaxation to being ready to being on edge? What are you communicating? Observe when you are following someone else's plan for how you should live. Is it what you want? Do you look at a clock to determine if you're hungry or if you're tired? Does it serve you or does it not serve you? And if you're going to live in a maze with a chunk of cheese, this is the end of my talk here, if you're going to live in a maze with a chunk of cheese at the end, at least make your own maze. Living naturally means having the widest range of options, being free to use them, and feeling value in your life, and being in the present. And did we have something else here? No, I think we can go with that. Any questions? Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. And thank you to the committee, wherever the committee is, for letting me speak. I always appreciate it. Thank you.